I am joined today by David and Brooke Condolora, and they make up the two halves of Brain and Brain. And we're going to be having a discussion and a post-mortem about their game Burly Men at Sea. So for those not aware that are watching it, Burly Men at Sea is a branching folktale adventure about storytelling through a trio of large bearded fishermen. And Brain and Brain is the husband and wife team behind it, as well as a couple other games. Thank you both for joining us today and talking with us about this game.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Of course. So to kind of get the conversation rolling, a couple of facts. So Burly Men at Sea was released on September 29th. It was released on Steam, Humble, Itch.io, Google Play, and the Apple App Store. So both PC and on mobile. And I was hoping that you guys would kind of, to start the conversation going, talk about what the experience of launching the game was like, what the reception was, what kind of awards and recognitions you guys received at launch, and kind of just the general feeling of bringing this game through to completion.
Well, I mean, you hit the storefronts, of course, and that it was a great experience for us. It was the first PC game we've launched, so our first game was on mobile only, and so this is our first time doing a Steam or Humble or Itch release. And things went really great. The first review we woke up to actually on the day we launched was from Time Magazine, where they gave it a 5 out of 5, and it was like shocking.
That was a good start.
Yeah, it was a nice way to start the day because it was one of those like nice things where we didn't reach out to them. We never would have thought to reach out to Time, but they got in touch with us like a couple days before we shipped, and we sent a copy over and then got this glowing review, which is still like one of our favorites. So the day started really well. People seem to really like the game, and the reception overall has been really, really positive. We've gotten a few award nominations. Most recently, it was an honorable mention for excellence in narrative at the IGF. So it didn't quite make it into the nominees, but very close. It was nominated for Best 2D Visuals at Unite LA last year. And Time put it in their top 10 games of 2016, so that was pretty sweet to be in a top 10 list, especially one like that. And some other festivals, we got a lot of selections like South by Southwest and EGX Res to put in their left field collection because it's sort of a different experience of a game. So yeah, we were really happy with it. And shipping PC and mobile in 9 languages as one programmer and one artist, it was a lot of work.
Yeah.
First time we've ever done anything anywhere close to that. Our first game was iPad only when we shipped in 1 language. So it's very different scale for us, but it went well.
Excellent. If you can talk about some of the numbers of that, of your sales and the kind of statistics behind it, I'm especially interested to see where it's your first PC release, what the sales difference is, not necessarily numbers, but just kind of a general sense. If sales were better on PC versus mobile sites, Apple versus Android, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so as a general breakdown, mobile has been the driving force for the game, and we both attribute that primarily to just the support that Apple in particular gave us on launch. We had formed a relationship with them over our first game, and so they actually gave us some nice placement when we launched the game on iOS and Mac App Store. Mobile's probably been a little over 2/3 of our sales, Android and iOS combined, which sort of surprised us. I was expecting it to be a little more 50-50. This Steam has been fine. Like, it's our biggest PC storefront, of course, as you would expect. And people, we have good reviews there, and people seem to like the game a lot. But it's been harder on the PC side to get any sort of visibility. And I think a lot of that is maybe that we're a few years late. Valve is really moving Steam toward like an algorithm-driven kind of featuring system, which makes some sense, but it's one of those things where you have to drive your own traffic, and without much of a marketing budget, or any marketing budget rather, and and maybe without some of the connections that we still sort of need in the bigger press, it was a little bit harder to drive some of our own traffic, and so. But even still, I think Steam sales are steady, and I think the PC market was certainly worth doing. And one of the little bits of criticism is maybe the wrong word, but people have the mistaken impression that the game was a mobile port to PC, which is not the case. We actually built it from the ground up for both, and the control scheme was actually designed with PC in mind.
Yeah, that was actually our first thought, was the cursor control. Actually.
Yeah, it was like a
just
click and drag instead of tap and swipe, but it worked well for both. And so people, for whatever reason, see it as a mobile-centric game. And really, it's either or, but the experience is the same on both platforms. So we're happy to have shipped on both.
Yeah.
And we don't, honestly, we don't mind that mobile's been the biggest driver.
'Cause we like it.
We like the platform, even though it's not well respected, I would say, but we like the platform anyway.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So moving from kind of some of the numbers, let's delve into the postmortem proper. Starting with, what do you feel went right in your development cycle? And from the very beginning through to the very end, what were some things that worked really well in the process?
Talk about the branching story,
What about it?
like the writing process.
Yeah, I think on the writing side, developing the story alongside the art and the game design and everything, that all just kind of happened simultaneously, and I was able to develop all of those, like starting at the beginning in order, going all the way to the end of development. And meanwhile, he was able to begin programming from the beginning as well, and so it seemed like the progression worked really well.
One of the things that Brooke did, so Brooke wrote and designed and did all the art and animation for the game. And one of the things she did early on with the writing process was sort of do a prototype in Twine. And so because the game's a branching story, like you talked about, it's a branching folktale. And so one of the first problems we ran into was like, how do we visualize this? And how are we able to play with the branching nature of the story? And so she used Twine to set all the scenes up as nodes, and actually wrote the text out a little bit more so than it is in the game itself. So more storybook-like, which we'll circle back to later. And that worked really well. So we could see all the connections between all the different scenes and make sure everything worked right and play through it and make sure it was a good experience. So so that, I hope, does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. What about funding? You had mentioned that some of the creative ways you approached funding worked really well. What were some of those that worked?
Yeah, so our story's a little crazy. We started by self-funding, and we naively thought that we'd be able to finish the game in less than a year, which was more of a hope than a real thought. And so it came down to it. We needed some more time, and we considered different ways to buy ourselves that time. We were living in the San Francisco area at the time, and it was very expensive, of course. And so what we ended up doing was deciding to leave our apartment and put a bunch of stuff in storage, sell the rest, and go work on farms across the United States, which seems completely oblique. But there's a program called WOOF. It stands for Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms. And basically they help you find local farms that you can volunteer on. In exchange for your 20 hours a week of volunteering, you get free room and board. And so we thought, well, hey, that'll cut down expenses significantly and still give us 20 hours a week to work on our games. So we thought, that's how we'll fund the rest of it. And we started doing that, and it was awesome. We spent, 4 weeks on a farm outside of Portland, Oregon, just taking care of animals, waking up at the crack of dawn and feeding them. It was fantastic.
We would let out a chicken stampede in the mornings at sunrise.
Yeah, 200 chickens just flying out every morning. And then in the afternoon, we'd go to a coffee shop and work on our game. And it was a nice balance between like the real world and the digital world. Great. But what it kind of showed us is that over time, that was going to make it take twice as long to finish our game, basically, because we lost half our work hours, even though we enjoyed it so much. So what we ended up doing then was just starting to travel full time. We didn't go back to an apartment, but we started just sort of chasing game festivals. We were showing the game at PAX and different festivals across the country. And so we would stay at Airbnbs either at those places or in between those places for long periods of time, like a month or 6 weeks. And so we ended up traveling for the next 18 months doing that and finishing the game. And in the meantime, Indie Fund got in touch with us and took a look at the game and liked it. And so they ended up funding it the rest of the way. So like the first year was self-funded and then a little bit of farm stuff, and then the second year was Indie Fund, and that's how we were able to finish it out. So it's kind of an unorthodox funding solution in the end.
Unorthodox, but incredibly interesting. I have to imagine that kind of experience helped shape Brain&Brain and Burly Men at Sea and how you kind of approach the process and see the world. It's really cool to hear that kind of story. Turning from something perhaps a little bit more hopeful to perhaps pessimistic, what went wrong? What were things that didn't work for you? What were things you had to scrap to make the game shippable?
I mean, a big one is sort of hand in hand with what we were just talking about, and that is when we made our budget for Indie Fund to figure out how much funding we needed, we left out two big things, and that was sound design and localization. We knew we wanted to put the game in more than one language, but we didn't budget for it at all.
Which were pretty big expenses to leave out.
Yeah, it was a good chunk of what would have been our budget, and so when we got close to the end, we discovered, oh, we got to pay for this stuff, and had to figure that out.
We made it work.
That surprises me a little bit because of the sound design in Burly Men at Sea seems so connected with the art style and the storytelling style. It all works together so intrinsically. Was it just something that was not maybe your forte, or something that?
It was something that David actually started out doing, because as an editor at Pixar, he did some sound design, and so he started out doing that, but then wasn't able to keep it up because of the time cost. So we had the idea to do vocalized sounds. We weren't sure how that would work or how people would like it, but we gave it to our composers to just try it out and see what we thought, and they did an awesome job, and we loved it. And everyone else seemed to also.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely.
That was the thing that could have gone horribly wrong.
Yeah, fair enough.
Great.
So we sent our composers a little test video and asked them to just do mouth noises through the whole thing, and they did it, and they sent it back to us in just a minute and a half, and we loved it, and so we went, through the rest of it. But that came very late in the process.
Yeah, we had the idea earlier in development. We got the idea from The Wind Rises, the Miyazaki film, and we just had no idea. I thought it would work really well with the music, but we just weren't sure, and they proved it.
But that was the last 2 months I was dropping all that sound in. Before that, it was all temp sound I had done myself. So
cool. So kind of looking at both sides, what are some things you do differently if you had to do it all over again? I mean, ultimately, that's the whole point of a postmortem, is looking and seeing how the process can be done better. So what would you do differently?
I felt like we spent too long in pre-production before we really started seeing progress on the game. It seems like, looking back, that the part of the game that was finished for the longest was the village, and the rest of it seemed like it just came together really quickly toward the end. Even though we knew for a long time how it would come together, it was just that actually going into production and finishing everything out.
Yeah, I would try to get a full playable thing, even if it's rough, together sooner. Because we actually found out very, very close to shipping, maybe 2 to 3 weeks before shipping, that we needed to make a key change at the end of the game. And that was because that was the first time we were able to play test it from beginning to end, was 3 weeks before we shipped. The content just wasn't there yet. So like Brooke said, we just lived with the village for a long, long time, churning over that. And that was good. The viewport mechanic that is the core of the game, that circle expanding and closing, that came about a year into development.
Yeah.
Pretty close to it. And so, we needed some of that time on the front end, but I think we took too much. Another thing is just that I think we would be a little bit more structured, maybe, which is related to that. But, for example, that budgeting snafu, that shouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And I think just setting more realistic deadlines and being a little more structured. I think that's probably the one area that indies in general, it's you kind of want to be naive about that kind of stuff, because you feel like that goes with the territory. You're supposed to be really flexible and nimble, and that's good. But at the same time, if you actually want to ship, and you want to ship something good, a little bit of structure helps. And so I think we would have done a little more of that.
Excellent. But launch really wasn't the end for you guys, because there's another part of the Burly Men At Sea process I want to talk about, which is the book. So for those unaware, Burly Men At Sea gives you a branching narrative. At the end of that narrative, you're given a code. And that code can be then turned into an actual real-world book that you guys have done up, illustrated, printed, and at this point sent out the first round. It's going to be a limited print. We'll have links to that in the description if people want to look into this a little bit more further. I want to know where this idea came from, and it seems from being outside the development process, um, a real burden to put on yourself, so to speak. Burly Men At Sea was very well received. It's kind of a complete package as it is, but you went kind of above and beyond to embrace storytelling by making it a real world book. Why did you do this, and what were some of the challenges that you ran into in getting that done?
So the idea, I guess, originally came from, would you say Kentucky Route Zero?
Maybe
So there's a Kentucky Route Zero interlude where you could actually order a physical copy of the play from the interlude, and so we did that, and it was just so cool to get a copy. It was like on our own shelf in real life that felt like it came straight from the game world. And so you actually had the idea for our future game first. But I sort of co-opted that idea and thought we should make print storybooks. And because you tell your own story with Burly Men At Sea, it just lent itself really well to a set of storybooks illustrated, and I guess the setting and everything, it just seemed perfect for that. So we had the idea, what was it, a year before we finished the game, or
At
earlier?
least, yeah. We talked about it for a long time, and
before.
it wasn't necessarily, it was always like, oh, we should do that, but we weren't sure exactly how we would do it, or if it would be at launch, or when it would be, until pretty close to the end, where we kind of made the commitment to at least open it up for pre-orders.
Yeah.
And it ended up being a process.
It did take longer than expected, but I think it was worthwhile. I think really the hardest part was honestly dealing with the actual printing and like the production of it itself. It did take a while to create all the content because I did do new illustrations for all of it. So a lot of it is based on direct art from the game, but I stylized everything further, and so it actually was all new. So that took longer, but the story itself I had pretty much written everything in long form for the Twine build of the game when we did the prototype. So I adapted a lot of that, and that helped. I think it helped speed it up a little bit, so I didn't have to write everything from scratch.
And what has the reception been like of the project? Obviously, it's been it's a fantastic part of this thing, but have people been ordering them? Has it been something that's been successful?
Yeah, I think we've done pretty well. We weren't sure how well they would sell, so we didn't want to print too many in the first run. But yeah, I think people have been really excited about it. They have been selling. We've talked to Fangamer actually about doing a single volume choose your own adventure version of these, which may be coming in the future. We'll see.
I hope so. Yeah, that would be really fun.
Yeah,
it seems like honestly, like printing a hardcover cloth bound nice book in the United States, it's not cheap. So we don't make very, very little per copy. They're as cheap as we could make them without losing money. So it was never about making money for us. It was more about providing the player that kind of just cool experience of having a physical artifact in the real world that came from their game world. And that was really what we wanted to do. Whether or not, it was a big hit or not, we felt like that was important.
It had to be part of it.
It just reinforces that you're the storyteller, and here's your story now on the shelf. And that's what we loved about it.
I think that does a fantastic job of relaying that. So I think you've certainly succeeded.
Cool.
Is there anything else you'd like to touch on looking at the process of developing Burly Men At Sea from this point, from being done, that you think especially other developers might find helpful?
There are a few small technical things. So this was our second game, and our first game was built with a totally different engine. That's one of the reasons it was mobile only. And so when we started our second project, I decided to switch over to Unity because as one programmer, I wanted the ability to go to more platforms because that was important for us. And so one of the key technical things that we did early on that I think really worked out well was creating the whole game in vector graphics. And so none of the game is, or almost none of it. Sorry, our dog is.
It's okay. It's charming. Don't leave the dog out.
Rasterized, really. It's almost all vector graphics in real time. They're SVG files that are converted to meshes. with the aid of a plugin for Unity called SVG Importer. And so what that allows is the game is sort of future-proof in a way, and you can run it at any resolution and it'll look great. So you can put it on a 4K display and it'll look awesome. You can put it on something very small and it'll look just as good. Which that was really cool, but also it saved us a lot on file size, and it made it easier for the workflow for Brooke and I. So she worked in a vector graphics app called Sketch. I was able to write some small scripts for that made it easy for her to export stuff, and then I could bring into Unity. So that we got a decent workflow going, and that was one thing that worked out well. I was trying to think if there's anything else. We also we kind of developed like a dialogue system for the game. I used very little like asset store type stuff. I like to write my own systems just because then I know what's going on. And
right.
I'm not the greatest programmer in the world. Like Brooke mentioned, I was an editor before doing all this, and so programming is still sort of new to me. But we kind of created a little bit of a like a markdown kind of formatting language. So Brooke would actually write the script in this formatting language that we created, and then I would run the text file through a system to bring it into a database, and then we had a database of all the dialogue. And that made it easy to translate and then export language files. And so then the game auto-chooses language files. This is sort of a basic thing that you need to do for localization. But for me, it was all new, and I was just kind of coming up with it all. So and I think we just made good use of like free and low-cost tools. The technical budget for the game was very small. A Unity license, and that's about it. We used AppleScript, that sort of thing. Yeah, any other things we might want to mention?
Well, thank you both for sharing so much about the past of Burly Men At Sea, your process, and the incredible heart that went into it. We're very thankful for you to do this postmortem with us, talk about the process from the other side. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Yeah,
we appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.